As a second vaccine gets the green light in the battle against coronavirus, Congress reverts to partisan squabbling over the size and form of badly needed pandemic aid. Here at home, a former Houston cop busted for wielding a gun in pursuit of a voter fraud scheme that wasn't. And out of City Hall, a long-term strategy to make traffic fatalities a thing of the past. But will car-loving Houstonians really answer the mayor's call to abandon vehicles and opt for cycles and mass transit instead? I'm Greg Groogan, and welcome to What's Your Point, where our panelists call it like they see it. Let's greet them. Starting us off, Charles Blain, founder of Urban Reform. Next up, Michele Leal, a former co-chair of the Latino Texas PAC. In the three spot, Tony Diaz, host of Latino Politics and News on KPFT Radio. Batting cleanup today, legal analyst and Houston attorney Carmen Roe. And closing us out, conservative political analyst Gary Pollard. Let's begin. A second vaccine to combat the coronavirus has been cleared by the Food and Drug Administration for mass distribution. With data indicating Moderna's variant is 94% effective, the approval comes as encouraging news during a week when the United States crossed a grim milestone with more than 300,000 deaths now attributed to COVID-19. The news also comes as frontline health workers in Houston's Med Center received the first welcome doses of the Pfizer vaccine, joining thousands of caregivers across the country getting the protection. There was also progress in the nation's capital, where lawmakers at long last appear to have set aside partisan differences and agreed on a second COVID-19 relief package, this one approaching $1 trillion. The measure would extend soon-to-expire unemployment benefits, offer help to small businesses, and deliver up to $600 to most Americans in the form of a stimulus payment. Panel, it's a lot of money, but is it near enough with so many hurting? Charles Blain, I'm going to start with you.
So it's a lot of money, but it's not, the portion going to Americans is not enough. So some of the numbers, if you look across this country, right? So Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, the average rent is $3,000. Across the river, Bergen County, New Jersey, average rent $1,600. Harris County and Phoenix, Arizona, average rent's $1,200. It's beginning at the start of this pandemic through now, the government has given folks who are in need $1,800 and said, good luck, we hope you make it. It is absolutely ridiculous that government has shut people down, has put them out of work, and they continue to get paid and think that Americans can survive on $1,800 and a minor increase in unemployment benefits. So it's kind of absurd that they had to fight over this for so long. And I will give the president and the administration credit, because they wanted to increase the share of funds that were going to be going to individuals, but the Democrats stood against that. I'm glad that relief is coming, but it's far from enough for the people who need it. And as people are approaching Christmas and they're looking at their representatives who are going home with full paychecks, full bellies, and full families in their homes, and we're told we can't meet with our families, we don't have money, and we don't have jobs, it's incredibly frustrating.
Okay, Tony Diaz, Senator Cornyn said we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Is something better than nothing, particularly as the vaccines are rolling out?
Well, I'm glad that the vaccines are rolling out, and I want our community to understand that if you see the officials taking it, you can trust it. I'm going to take it. So I'm looking forward to taking it. I hope people will take it when they can, because that will help us. You still got to follow all the protocols. Having said that, I agree with Charles. Why are they dragging their feet on this relief bill? Because people are suffering right now. And let's get something straight. They were not bickering about giving people more than $300 more for unemployment benefits or more than $600 a month in relief. That's not the issue. They were arguing about some of the minutia of their own powers as extended by emergency powers for the Federal Reserve. So in other words, they are arguing amongst themselves to who keeps power after Trump is out of office and Biden is, instead of worrying about the people. I'd like to rag on Trump for this. I want to go middle line. I'm going to agree with Charles on this. You need to step up before midnight. Don't close the government down. Help Americans right now. That's why we have a government. Do your job.
Gary Pollard, you watch the sausage-making process that is what goes on in a huge bill like this. What was your take?
That it was sausage-making and the priorities were not taking care of the people. That's a big problem. The other big problem is this. The problem was not COVID-19. The problem was the reaction of politicians to how to deal with it. They shut down. They said, we need to shut down. We need to separate. It turns out that didn't make any difference at all. All it did was call a timeout for COVID. And then when everyone started going back to doing things, COVID started expanding again. So we made a big mistake. The government is messed up. And yes, they should do more for the people. But let's keep this in mind. There's no money from the federal government to give. The money they're giving us is going to be borrowed or created out of thin air by the Federal Reserve. And at some point, I don't know when, there'll be a reckoning for this country that our massive deficits are going to have to be dealt with.
All right, Michele Leal, jump in here. Do you think this is not enough to get the American public over the hump as the vaccines are distributed?
Sure. I agree with Charles and Tony. It certainly isn't enough, but I don't think something that we haven't talked about in terms of what's going on and all the infighting and what's taking so long to get a deal done is, the sticking point right now, which is essentially the Republican attack on local governments and any aid going to local governments and wanting to continue fighting that out in an effort to make Democratic officials that lead local municipalities look bad rather than take care of the American people and their needs during the holidays.
All right, final word goes to our resident pragmatist, Carmen Roe.
Okay, so first of all, I think everybody should keep in mind that the vaccine hopefully is going to help with what we all think is going to be an economic crisis of sorts as we go into the new year, having dealt with the COVID for so long. That's a real concern. So when we talk about getting this money out, it couldn't be more important to get it out soon. But my take is that, $600, as Charles said, doesn't do much for many people. And more importantly, the government will never be able to support our people. What we really need to focus on is making sure that small businesses, such as the one that I have, get money so they can continue to employ and pay these people the amount of money they need to pay their bills and make sure they don't get kicked out of their homes. And so I haven't heard a lot about small business planning, which I know under the Trump administration, there was a focus there. I hope they continue to focus there so that we can sustain long-term the damage that the COVID's done in our community.
Quickly, Charles Blain, respond to Gary Pollard and his concerns over what is just a massive deficit.
No, I agree. It is a massive deficit. I don't think the package amount should be increased. I think the portion of that package amount that's going to individual Americans should be increased. But to respond to Michele's point, because this local government thing is a sticking point for me, I don't think that the federal government should be tasked with bailing out these local governments that have racked up unfunded pension liabilities, taken out so much debt, not always with voter approval, has increased taxes, increased spending, and they just spend and spend and spend, and that's what they want to do more of. So I don't think that we should be bailing them out from the federal level. I think they need to figure it out themselves.
I think you need to stop playing politics.
It's not politics. It's
the people. You were reasonable earlier. Now you just
if they
play
governed
politics.
better, we wouldn't be in this situation.
Help the people.
All right, we're going to leave it there, folks. Up next, very strong evidence emerging that COVID-19 has reached far more of us than we may have thought. And later, we'll break down Mayor Turner's newly released plan aimed at eliminating all traffic deaths by prioritizing people over cars. We want to know what types of transportation you'd prefer to see favored over roadways. Make your voice heard by voting on our Fox 26 Twitter poll. Shoot us a comment and we may just put it on the air later in the show. Watch Your Point continues in just 1 minute. Welcome back. Newly released research indicates the number of Houstonians infected with COVID-19 may actually be 4 times greater than what we had thought. That finding is the result of a Houston Health Department study conducted in September, which detected antibodies in more than 13% of those tested, a number far higher than the total of confirmed cases at the time. Panel, given how easily the virus spreads and the fact that many who get it feel few symptoms, should any of us really be surprised? I'm going to start with you, Carmen Roe.
This is a fascinating study, but a small one. This hasn't been peer tested, and I think they tested like 3,300 people in Santa Clara, California. So this is going to be an interesting study once they do it more widespread, but I don't know that these results tell us really anything at these numbers.
Charles Blain, what do you think of this? I mean, you're an urban study guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. They said the city had, I think, 57,000 reported cases through their sites, and what they're saying is that it's up to like 250,000 given this test. So what they're determining that the numbers look like. And I mean, what do you expect, especially in a major urban area where you still have public transportation operating, where you still have overcrowding in a lot of parts of town, you have multi-generational housing, and it's a transmittable disease. I mean, it's transmitted through close proximity, so it's not surprising that in a city you're going to see these numbers. But I think it goes to show that if all these people had it and they weren't hospitalized or even really tested, then it goes to show that many people weathered the storm better than we expected they would.
Gary Pollard, you've had to run a law practice during all of this. Would it surprise you to hear that 4 times as many people have actually been infected?
Not at all. I mean, I've had clients, I've had people that work with me that were exposed, tested positive for COVID, but had minor symptoms. So I think what this tells us is, in terms of herd immunity, we're making more progress than we think. But it still doesn't mean the disease is not dangerous, because it is unpredictable who it's going to adversely affect when it hits.
Yeah, it's always been about slowing down the spread. Jump in here, Michele Leal. What do you think of this City of Houston Health Department study?
I think it is a little bit of a small sample size to know anything very definitive, but I wouldn't be surprised about more people having it than we think, and certainly given the testing delays that we had early on because the federal government did not want to have any kind of comprehensive strategy. I think a lot of people probably have antibodies, never could get a test.
Tony Diaz, we reopened schools, we expanded opening and then reeled back on the statewide level. Do you have the belief that a lot more folks have been exposed to COVID-19 than we really know about?
Without a doubt. I'm not shocked by these findings. And of course, the COVID-19 epidemic has had a huge impact in the Latino community. I applaud the Houston Health Department. I've worked with them to do outreach in Spanish to reach Latinos. The problem is we're talking about a segment of society that is not on the radar, that we need to go out and reach in person when we can't. And I think additionally, these are folks that may not be able to maneuver the health system. When I go try and get tested for COVID, it's not always as straightforward and easy. So I think we have to do more. And the after effects are bad. There's a lot of reports now how people are still suffering in ways they weren't aware of. Kids are having long-term effects. So I think we really have to understand that there's an underserved part of our community that needs help, especially the Latino community.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Still ahead, the Electoral College has spoken loud and clear, but the president just doesn't seem to care. The turbulent transition is on our virtual table for discussion after a short break. Welcome back. On December 14th, presidential electors from all 50 states gathered and dutifully cast their ballots. By day's end, Democrat Joe Biden had accumulated 306 electoral votes, 36 more than the minimum needed for election. Hours later, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell recognized and congratulated the president-elect. Even for Republicans concerned about election irregularities, Monday's electoral vote signaled that it was time to move on.
The Electoral College has spoken. That is the final say.
And yet, panel, my Twitter feed is jam-packed with Trump supporters still alleging election-altering fraud, manipulation of electronic voting systems, and even the complicity of Supreme Court Justice John Roberts. None of these claims have been accompanied, as of yet, by evidence that would stand up in court. What has been largely confirmed is that the president has raked in an additional $200 million in contributions, reportedly to fund his battle to remain in office. Gary Pollard, what's going on here?
It's interesting. I actually think that if the opposite had happened in this election and Trump had won a narrow victory, that the Democrats and Joe Biden would be doing the same thing and allege that there were improprieties and things weren't done right. So what's happening is Trump, I think, understands he did not win the election. It was close, but at the end of the day, he has to look at himself as to why he didn't win, because Joe Biden made Trump the referendum for the people to vote on, and they decided by a narrow margin they preferred Joe Biden over Trump's personality. So what happens? He's raising money. He's trying to figure out what his future is. Does he run again? Does he establish a media corporation, and he wants to stay, most importantly, he wants to stay out front because he is the star of the show. And if you look back in the spring when he was on every day talking about COVID and wouldn't back off and got overexposed, what happened was Trump could not bear not being the star. And that's what it's all about. And he wants to continue to be the star.
Michele Leal, do you think this is all just about the president not being willing to give up the limelight?
I think his whole presidency has been about not being willing to give up the limelight. And, I think this fundraising campaign that he's undertaken to pay off his debts and under the guise of trying to resolve any concerns about the election and to continue to fight that battle, it's just ridiculous. And I can't believe that people are still throwing their money away at something like that.
Charles Blain, as somebody who'd like to see the Republican regenerate and re-evolve, what's your take on this?
There's a lot to unpack here. I think multiple things can be true, and depending on which side you're on, you don't want to believe multiple things. I think those multiple things are, yes, like Gary said, the president did lose by a narrow margin. I think also true, there is election fraud, and it needs to be investigated. Did election fraud cost him the election? No, but we still need to vet through the process. Otherwise, people will never have faith in the process. And I think that's the problem, is that we are a deeply divided country right now. Half of the country does not believe that the process played out correctly. And so why not vet through that process to reassure people that it was? And I also agree that I think the president, he has grand plans on how he's going to stay involved. I mean, they announced, I think last week or the week before, that on inauguration day, he's going to have a rally in Florida where there's a chance he might announce his re-election bid for 2024. So I don't expect him to go away, nor do I expect the fervent supporters to go away, because he has built and cultivated a base that is dedicated to seeing him in office. And so this isn't the end of it, but we also need to vet through all of the allegations.
Carmen Roe, let's reel back a little bit. We have a billionaire president who is asking, calling for his supporters to give him money to fight a legal battle, even one that's fairly far-fetched. What's your take on that?
It's a losing battle. I think we all know that. And it's just, to me, it's an embarrassment at this point. And so even if you were a Trump supporter or you continue to be, at some point, I think he has to concede. I think he needs to gracefully, kind of regain his composure and his power source. And I don't think he's doing it. And so for me, as a history major, I'm looking at his legacy, which I think was strong for his supporters until we got to this. And so if he refuses to leave the White House, as there's some suggestion that he won't leave, willingly, between that and everything else, I just think it's a sad way to leave office, because it didn't have to be this way. It was a narrow margin. There is fraud, but that doesn't change, the narrative that he's putting out there that I don't think is going to look good when we look back on it in history.
Antonio Diaz, the final 45 seconds goes to you.
Close. Let's see. Donald Trump's definition of an electoral landslide is exactly what he lost by. And he lost the popular vote for a second time. This is craziness. And let's get something straight. He not only didn't do any of his promises, he couldn't build a wall, he couldn't fix healthcare, he couldn't even lead a coup. He's been trying to overthrow the government. That really is terrible. That will be his legacy. And any Republicans who support him should be ashamed of themselves, including Ken Paxton. And it's not the same. Democrats did not lead over 60 frivolous, waste of time lawsuits and counting. And Ken Paxton should be ashamed of himself for playing into this, trying to trick his way into a pardon, and for humiliating Texas. It's time for Trump to go. And if he doesn't, I hope a DACA recipient walks him out when he's trespassing, when he's done.
What overthrowing of the government? They have tried to undermine his presidency since the beginning.
Okay, guys, we got to wrap it right there. Still to come. He called it 6 months ago. Political columnist Ken Herman told us Donald Trump would not leave the White House without a major stink. Our follow-up conversation with the Pulitzer Prize winner is up next. Welcome back. In June, we explored a hypothetical with the Austin American-Statesman's Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter and columnist Ken Herman. Like a modern-day Cassandra, Herman predicted that if the president were to lose, getting him to actually give up the job willingly could prove a rough task. Well, 47 days have passed since the election, and we figured it was time to check in with Herman. Ken Herman, dead solid perfect. Your forecast this summer of a president unwilling to leave the White House was dead solid perfect.
I like to believe I'm psychic. Some people go with psychotic, but no, here's why. Here's why. Because here's the truth about this president of ours. He has three things that you want in a president, three admirable qualities: predictable, transparent, and consistent. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to like what you predict they're going to do, but how could you not see this coming? Remember when he ran 4 years ago, and I think didn't hope to win, just wanted to, refresh his celebrity. He was saying before the election 4 years ago, oh, it's all rigged. Now, of course, when he won, it was fine. It was great. If he had lost, he would do just what he's doing now. It's incredibly dangerous. Who knows what he's going to do?
Herman, let's talk ulterior motive. The president, less a businessman, more a marketer. And this has been a successful marketing scheme. He has raised something like $200 million for his legal battle. Your thoughts there?
Your word is exactly right. This man is a master marketer. And as he reminds us every other tweet, 75 million people voted for him. And that's not to be discounted. Of course, unfortunately for him, 81 million people voted for the other guy. And these things happen. You win some, you lose some.
Trump's handpicked Attorney General Bill Barr said there is no evidence of outcome-changing fraud that the Justice Department has come up with. Should that have been the end of it for the president?
Greg, are you new on the planet? Have you just arrived here? Let me get you up to speed here. If you don't abide by the rulings of the courts, I guess there's some talk that he wants to take this to the Supreme Court and, go to the next one. How many justices have I appointed to the even more Supreme Court? But the whole thing falls apart if you don't believe in court rulings that come out adverse to you. You don't really have a recourse. And if you think you should, you're not for the system we all have agreed to live under.
What do you think is going to happen here? There's even talk he may announce his reelection bid on Biden's inauguration day.
The marketing ploy here that a grifter would use is, why not? Here's what I think he'll do. And again, remember, I'm psychotic, so I know this stuff. He will tease it. It'll be reality show like, he already started. They, email people, should I run again? Should I run? Oh, maybe I'll run, and that'll go on for a while and they'll raise money. I might be running, so send me money. And he may run, he may not, but he won't answer it for maybe years because he doesn't want to get off the stage because there's nothing in it for him to get off the stage. My ultimate theory is he doesn't run again. One, he's kind of a little old, and two, he's a coward. And I think the thought of possibly losing again, if he runs again, one of two things happen. He loses, and I just don't think he can take that, or he wins, and then he has to be president again.
Up next, the ex-local cop who claimed to have uncovered massive election fraud, now facing potential prison time for armed assault. The emerging scandal surrounding Mark Aguirre is up for consideration when we come back. Instead of blowing the top off a gargantuan scheme to fix the November election, former Houston Police Captain Mark Aguirre finds himself in very big trouble. The 63-year-old private investigator is charged with aggravated assault after ramming a delivery van he believed was loaded with fraudulent ballots and then threatening the driver at gunpoint. Now, according to prosecutors, the only thing stashed in the van was a collection of air conditioning parts and no wayward ballots. If the incident leads to a conviction, the crime will have been funded by Aguirre's client, controversial conservative activist Dr. Stephen Hotze. Panel, what do you make of this development? Let's go to Carmen Roe.
What an embarrassment. But, one thing to keep in mind, which I find interesting, is that Hotze hired a bunch of private investigators. So this was just one of many people who were out on the streets looking for voter fraud. This gentleman, who was fired by HPD years ago, clearly is overly aggressive and probably should have been charged with a prior Kmart incident. And so, one, he's charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, which is a second-degree felony. I don't think they're going to bring Hotze into it unless they can show some direct connection. But this guy's in hot water, and there may be other people out on the street who are going to be charged as well.
Gary Pollard, you know all the players here. What's going down?
Well, I mean, Dr. Hotze raised money and was funding investigations into voter fraud, also funding actions to discourage voter fraud. We forget that the interim county clerk placed there by Rodney Ellis was planning to pull a Georgia type plan or a Michigan type plan, mailing massive mail-in ballots, which we know is the basis of fraud. You can't check those ballots out. And that's where it comes across everywhere. And that's why we need legislation, by the way. So that was legitimate. I mean, the idea that somehow Dr. Hotze's involved in Aguirre's idea to ram a car is absurd in its face. I mean, I don't understand what Aguirre was doing and why he would ram someone's car. But it is interesting that that happened in October and it took till post-election to get a charge filed. And that day, the police officers just let him go. So that's interesting. But yes, there was a threat of ballot fraud here. The plan in Harris County was to steal enough votes to steal Texas from Trump. And that was stopped by Dr. Hotze, by actions by Attorney General Paxton and others.
All right, Tony, what do you think of that?
So if you can't find voter fraud, just get a bunch of money and create some vigilantes. So there's some down on his luck guy that's some right-wing activist, waves $200,000 to $300,000 under his nose. Evidently, there's 29 other guys in this situation. So if you can't find actual voter fraud, you go out and you try and scare people out of it, into it. It makes no sense. It's terrible. It gives Texas a bad name, but it shows you the kind of voter suppression that right-wing activists are always trying to do, because these are the same forces that try to overturn drive-up drop-offs for voters. That's legitimate as proven in courts. So Texas needs to get its act straight, stop suppressing voters directly, indirectly, let freedom ring. This is an embarrassment. This kind of stuff should stop.
Charles Blain, you've been watching this pretty closely. I'm eager to hear your take.
Yeah, this thing is a mess. And to correct Tony, I agreed with a lot of what he said, but to correct him, this was not some down on his luck guy. As Carmen alluded to, this guy was involved in a raid in Kmart that led to 278 arrests and 32 officers disciplined, and they called him the mastermind behind this like crazy raid back in the day. So I would suggest people Google that and kind of get some background here on who this is. And so I do take issue with people taking it upon themselves to not just investigate voter fraud. I think we have people who do that, activists who do that very well, but take into their own hands the prosecution, if you will, of it by, I mean, chasing someone down instead of just turning over whatever information you think you have to the cops. That's deeply concerning, because I know there was a lot of talk during this election of people taking it into their own hands, and who knows how these situations can turn out. And so, yeah, I take issue with a lot of things that happened here. And I also take issue with, how long it took for him to be charged and why he was let go that day if he put a gun in this guy's face. I mean, that's a problem, because I bet you if this was someone else in the city who did that, they wouldn't have been let go that day.
Michele Leal, last 20 seconds to you. Keep it tight.
Sure. So, I guess that's the local Republican Party now, is that when their voter suppression doesn't work and they still lose, they're going to invent allegations of voter fraud and pay someone to assault small business owners in the attempt to prove it.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Up next, Harris County Commissioner Rodney Ellis and his mysterious art collection, now the target of new legislation aimed at punishing abuse of power. It should be a lively discussion, so don't go away.
I'm working with the county attorney's office to clear it up. I was told Sam Januti with African Art Global owned it. I hope he does.
With everything that's happened over the past year, it almost seems like ancient history. I'm referring to the discovery of that Precinct 1 taxpayer-funded warehouse jam-packed with hundreds of pieces of mysterious and valuable African art. While Commissioner Rodney Ellis claims it's all a misunderstanding, critics believe Ellis used public property for his own personal gain. Interstate Senator Paul Bettencourt, who Friday filed Senate Bill 252, which would define storing personal property in taxpayer-funded facilities as an abuse of power and elevate the offense to a felony. Now, Bettencourt says his bill would empower the Texas Attorney General to prosecute if the district attorney decides not to. I'm going to go to Gary Pollard. What do you think of all this?
Well, I think that Ellis clearly, it appears, has violated abusive official capacity and should be charged. My understanding is the DA's office is investigating, and of course, as Carmen knows, there's a lot of things that go on there you don't hear about till a grand jury gets to hear the case. But I do think there's sufficient evidence based on what I've seen from investigators to indict him for using public funds to feather his own nest. The fact that he has stonewalled the media, Greg, as you know, and not talked about this when asked his questions, clearly shows that Ellis is a bad guy. The other thing it tells me is this: Rodney Ellis believes he is above the law, that he's better than everybody else, and he doesn't have to respond to anybody about anything because he basically is the king of Harris County.
Criminal defense lawyer Carmen Roe, take it from there.
You know, this is a frustrating case, and, you know, this has been sitting for a year. A year we've been investigating what is a misdemeanor. And it's, you know, it's politically powerful leaders who seem to get away with things that other people simply would not. And so this bill, in my mind, is nothing more than an attempt to put political pressure on Kim Ogg's office to do something. But worse than that, to me, this is a waste of taxpayers' money to implement a law that we shouldn't need on the books to make a felony an offense that we can't seem to wrap around an individual who's a leader in the community here in Houston. Across the board, frustrating. I hope that this is the catalyst that brings about charges, and let Senator Ellis defend those charges once they're there. But we haven't even seen an indictment yet.
Charles Blain, you buy that? Could this just be pressure on Kim Ogg?
Oh, I mean, yeah, of course. I think everybody wants to put pressure on Kim Ogg to move on this and move on other local, on prosecuting other local officials for their misdeeds. But the thing is, you know, as an activist, as a taxpayer, if this is in the works, I'd rather them, you know, cross their T's and dot their I's and take the time to make sure this sticks than to let him get off on this, because it smells bad and we all know it's bad, and we want to make sure that it sticks because Ellis does have a propensity for getting away with things. I mean, we talked on this show, but even before the African art thing, about how he was using the stamps from the commissioner's court office that they're allotted the funds for to send out campaign-like material. And I received one because I lived in the district. So we see this time and time again. So if they have something, I'd rather them take the time to make sure it sticks than let this, blow by.
Tony, 20 seconds.
This sounds like a personal beef. This is a bill to create a law that's already covered. This is already against the law. So prove it. And the press release released by Bencourt's office sounds like a personal vendetta where he directly names Commissioner Rodney Ellis in the press release and makes it sound like he's creating a law tailored to get Rodney Ellis. Now, he should have his day in court. Figure this out in court. To make a law specific to one person, that looks really bad.
Got to leave it there. When we come back, a Bayou City without traffic fatalities. Is it pie in the sky or a genuine possibility? Mayor Sylvester Turner's ambitious plan is the topic for our panel after the break. Goals rarely get more ambitious. The complete elimination of traffic deaths in the nation's fourth largest city with just a single decade to do it. Sound far-fetched? Mayor Sylvester Turner says it can actually happen with his Vision Zero executive order. Based on what's been reported, the idea is to convert a widely spread, car-loving H-town into a metropolis that discourages the use of automobiles and strongly supports other means of getting around like mass transit, cycling, and old-fashioned walking. On the drawing board, reduced speed limits, lots more sidewalks and bikeways, traffic light adjustments, and a total redesign of many roadways. Panel, do you think a majority of Houstonians are buying what the mayor is selling when it comes to mobility? I'm going to start with you, Michele Leal.
Sure. I think it's a really ambitious plan, and certainly I think it's needed, but it might be a little bit far-fetched considering the fiscal climate that we're going into following this pandemic, and, you know, what a car-centric city we have always been, and how far behind we really are on sidewalks and on mobility issues.
Gary Pollard, jump in here. Do you think Houstonians who, when they have enough money, the first thing they do is get off the bus and buy a car, are going to buy in? Or have we gone there?
Yeah, they buy cars. Vision Zero is actually a national group and have plans to how to handle this. And some of the things that the mayor mentioned are good ideas, like redesigning the most dangerous streets in Houston. I think there's a huge percentage of where the accidents take place in certain areas of town. So that would be smart. And adding sidewalks is not a negative thing. So I think in some aspects it's good. Getting people out of their cars and they're going to ride mass transit in an era of COVID with other maybe diseases coming down the track, that's not happening. So I think there are aspects of the plan are good. And look, I applaud the mayor for looking at innovative ways to try to reduce fatalities.
Charles Blain, it's your generation that's going to have to embrace this. Is there widespread support?
I wouldn't say widespread. Widespread support for decreasing traffic fatalities, of course, but not for kind of transitioning over to these alternative modes on a permanent basis. I mean, Houston's a hot city. It's a big city. You kind of need a car to get around. But the thing is, what this study found is that 6% of Houston roads account for 60% of the fatalities, like Gary was just saying, about a small percentage of the roads accounting for a lot of these problems. And so if they focus on those, I think that we could bring down these fatalities. And it may not be to zero, but we can significantly decrease them. You know, there's a meme that's really true, and it goes around where it's on the left, it says Houston during the day, and it's a lady driving to church. And on the right, it says Houston at night, and it's a picture of the Autobahn. And it's because people do really take initiative to do whatever they want on these streets. And so they should scale it back a bit. I'm excited to see where this goes.
Carmen, take 30 seconds.
So I'm a woman who walks around in heels and suits. It's too hot in Houston to do too much travel outside of a vehicle, first of all. Second of all, you know, as far as mass transit and things like that, I agree. I think with the COVID, that's not going to be a thing for a while. But the interesting thing about these studies is that they say that 60% of all of the accidents happen in 6% of the roadways, and that most of those involve pedestrians. And so clearly those are huge numbers. And so if we targeted that in this project, I think it would be a huge, huge win for Houston.
All right, I think we're just going to have to leave it there. Still ahead, numbers don't lie. Empirical proof, every vote matters, and those who don't cast them should forfeit their right to complain. Stay with us. What's your point? We'll be right back. Welcome back. Under the category every vote really does count, we turn to the recent mayoral race down the road in Dickinson, where apparent winner Sean Skipworth bested challenger Jennifer Lawrence by just 3 votes. While some kind of recount is likely, the larger point is this: despite all the cheering for this year's record turnout, more than 80 million Americans who could have voted chose not to. That's about 1 in 3. Okay, Tony, preach.
Well, I think at the end of the day, this really is a shocking number. This is basically like another political party of Americans who, they don't care, maybe they're confused. And I want to side with the people. Maybe there's an active movement to disengage them. There's a sociologist, Pierre Bourdieu, that says the people who don't vote, that's their vote. They are rejecting the system in different ways. And I got to side with some community members. You don't have the same city council member because you're in a different district than your school board, than your state rep, than your congressman, etc. It gets very confusing. So they need to vote, but we need to make it a little easier and clearer for them to vote, just like we can find students and make sure that they register for the draft, just like we can find you, make sure you pay your taxes. We should inspire and make sure people vote.
Charles, go ahead on this.
I agree with Tony. I mean, it's difficult to know who it's not difficult, but it's time consuming to learn who all your local officials are in Texas. You have, everything up and down the MUD representatives and school board members and state board of education and this and that and the other. And when you get to that granular local level, people just don't pay attention as much, especially in a year when the federal election has taken it always takes top billing, but has sucked all the air out of the room. And so I think we all need to do a better job of educating people about the importance of local government and who their local officials are, because people just don't know and don't really care. And it is sad. I mean, you look at Houston City Council mayoral elections and the numbers are also relatively low. This was shocking, but people need to learn more about their local elected officials.
All right, we're leaving it there. Up next, as an iconic sports mascot is finally kicked to the curb, the great emancipator comes under fire from those looking to cancel historical accolades they claim are undeserved. Should be a good discussion, so stick around. Welcome back. Not sure anyone was terribly surprised to hear this week that the Cleveland Indians are abandoning the name they've carried for the past 105 years. In this climate of restitution and reckoning, the path of least resistance is to offend no one, if at all possible. And frankly, many Native Americans have taken serious issue with Chief Wahoo for decades. Shifting now to the West Coast, where ultra-liberals in the city of San Francisco are seeking to demonize none other than Abraham Lincoln. A school district committee is recommending the 16th president's name be stripped from a high school, in part because he didn't demonstrate that Black lives truly matter. Okay, panel, you have all read plenty of history. Is this legit or cancel culture gone berserk? Gary Pollard.
This is cancel culture gone berserk. They're using it as a political tool of domination and suppressing dissent. That's what this is about. The Cleveland Indians, the name Indians. Remember Chief Wildwood, they got rid of them a couple of years ago. That could have been offensive. Cleveland Indians, who could be offended by that? You must be looking for things to do. And Abraham Lincoln, this was predicted. You go back a year ago when the cancel culture started rising up, they said, they're going to go after Lincoln someday. They actually went after Frederick Douglass. These know-nothings are wanting to destroy American history because they don't like America. And so what I tell them is get a grip. I wouldn't change any of it. It tells you the fools who run San Francisco are out of control.
Jump in here, Michele Leal.
Sure. I guess Gary's not one for geography either, because using the term Indian to refer to indigenous Americans just represents a geographical inaccuracy. And I don't think it's cancel culture. I think we've been celebrating a revisionist version of history for a long time, and we're righting some of those wrongs. And I don't have a problem with that at all.
Okay, Carmen Roe, are we forcing our 21st century norms on people who operated in the 1860s, as with Abraham Lincoln?
The fascinating thing about history is that it changes all the time. And the way that it changes is the way we interpret it and the way that we view it through our perspective of today. And so if you believe that Indian is a racial slur, which apparently it is, then it's right for them to change the name. And importantly, the Cleveland Indians have only had that name since 1947. It was several names before that. And so as we continue to evolve, so will names and so will places and things. And I think there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay, Charles Blain, the great emancipator, has got a target on him in San Francisco.
Yeah, no, this is all totally legit. You know who we should cancel next? Maybe the New York Jets and the New York Giants, because they actually play in New Jersey. And as a New Jerseyan, I feel erased and oppressed because they're ignoring us. This is crap. They need to stop it. Cancel culture has gone, berserk.
All right, Tony, what's your take?
The right wing is trying to take the praxis, the deep examination of history, and generalize it and stereotype it. Yes, calling indigenous communities Indians is a racial slur. Don't do it. Additionally, in San Francisco, this was a committee that recommended they further study not just Abraham's relationship to slavery and the indigenous communities which America oppressed. Additionally, they called into question naming high schools after missions because the colonizers that were Spaniards came in and oppressed indigenous along those Spanish trails. They didn't say do it. The school boards who are elected by the community still have to decide. They're merely looking at the history and thinking about it. America is a democracy. It takes a lot of thinking to be a democracy. I love that we're having this discussion. Don't refer
Their
to
version of
stereotypes.
history.
Wake up, use your head, be logical. America should be the pinnacle of what it means to be
We're
an
a republic.
So grow up, dream, and stop oppressing with words.
All right, everybody had their say. We're going to leave it right there. Thanks for joining us. The conversation continues on a national level next with Fox News Sunday and host Chris Wallace. From all of us here, have a safe and healthy week.